Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're with us today. You've come back, or if this is your first time, welcome. My name is Rosa Rodriguez-Williams. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and ella, and I'm the Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion at the MFA. Thank you for joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to MFA Voices, a series that pulls back the veil and goes behind the objects to offer viewers the chance to hear about the work of various departments. I will shortly introduce my special guest. But before I do that, we would like to acknowledge that the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, founded in 1870, stands on the historic homelands of the Massachusetts people, a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different nations. As a museum, we acknowledge the long history of the land we occupy today and seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. We can all learn more about the Massachusetts people who continue to be one of many Indigenous stewards of this land by visiting massachusettstribe.org. A few housekeeping things before we begin the program. Portions of the program will be recorded and available as a recording later this spring. Please note, when the recording is taking place, you are welcome to turn off your video and mute your audio in order to not be included. The majority of the recording will only show the speakers. A transcript and closed captions for this program are available through Rev for Zoom live captions. To enable closed captions, go to the bottom of the Zoom window, click the up arrow button next to closed captions, and then click on show subtitle to start displaying Rev live captions. We're going to try to say our name when a new speaker begins to help lend clarity to the transcript. During the session, questions and comments can be shared and are encouraged via Zoom chat or the raise your hand function. And so I'm happy to start our conversation today with Olga Khvan, Content Manager and Public Relations. Olga Khvan is the Content Manager in Public Relations Department at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, a team that promotes the MFA's exhibitions, programs, and initiatives through press, outreach, and social media. Prior to joining the MFA in 2016, Olga worked as an assistant digital editor at Boston Magazine, where she wrote stories about the local arts and culture scene and photographed events around the city, from the Boston Marathon to the Halloween Canine Promenade on the Esplanade. Oh, I'll have to ask her about that. She graduated from Boston University with a dual degree in journalism and art history. Please welcome to MFA Voices, Olga Khvan.
Hi, Rosa. It's so good to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I have so many questions. I mean, I love social media, and this is what you do. But tell me about the dogs. How cool is that?
The dogs. I don't know if they do it anymore, but every Halloween they used to have this costume parade on the Esplanade. Mostly the dogs were dressed up, sometimes owners. And it was my job to go take pictures of cute dogs and then post a slideshow on bostonmagazine.com. Definitely one of my favorite assignments.
That's amazing. Olga, welcome. I'm so glad you made time for me today and for all of us. I am so happy you're here, and I've had the opportunity to work with you on different things since I've arrived at the museum. And so I'm excited to share what you do, the awesome work that you and your team do here at the museum. So let's get started. So share a little bit about what that work is.
Sure. So very simply put, I do a lot of writing at the museum and storytelling. Like you mentioned, it's my team's job to promote everything that's going on at the museum. And that's actually my favorite part of the job is we work across the entire institution. So for example, an exhibition really takes a village to build. And when I'm writing an exhibition press release, I work with a variety of people. So primarily the curators will go through and they'll give me an overview of the gallery sections and the thesis of the show so I can convey it to the press and the public. But if there was a conservation project that happened to one of the objects, we'll want to highlight that. If there's a related publication for the exhibition, we'll want to tell people about that. Related programming, if there's special products in the shop, you name it, anything that's related, it's my job to compile it all into one cohesive story and present it to the public. So that's the press side, is giving journalists the information that they need to write their stories about the MFA. And then on the social media side, we post 1 to 3 times a day on our main channels, which are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We're at MFA Boston. If you don't already follow us, you should. So that's a lot of content. And so we're a team of 4 and we all contribute. We work both a week out and a month out. We look at the editorial calendar, see what's coming up, what do we need to promote if there's an upcoming virtual program or exhibition opening. But then we layer in fun stuff like artist birthdays or trending social media holidays like National Wine Day or National Cheese Day. We love those. So yeah, and it's a lot of, again, working across the museum to figure out what everyone's working on and what we should be highlighting.
What are some of those things that you love most about your job? I mean, to do the work that you do, I'm imagining, or I would assume that you're super creative in the way that you see the world, and so it translates into your work. What are some of those things that you love about what you do here?
I really love being in the galleries with curators and artists especially living artists. It's such a joy and privilege to be able to look at a work of art with the person who made it. And it's been interesting too. Sometimes we don't think about when an artist makes a work of art and then they sell it to a gallery or museum or to a private collector, and then they maybe don't see it for years. And then when they have an exhibition at the museum, it's all brought together again. And so I've been there for some of those moments when these artists see their work for the first time in years, and it's just incredible. So I really love being there for those moments and then capturing them and sharing them with the public. I think it's really special.
Amazing. So I know that Lee Jonas was on site recently. Yes. How was that? Was that super cool?
That was so cool. So one of the 12 artists featured in our exhibition, Writing the Future, Basquiat and the Hip Hop Generation. It's about the post-graffiti movement in New York City. So Basquiat is really the front runner of that movement, the most famous one, but he had this whole community of artists, mostly artists of color, that were working with him. And so that was amazing. And one of those moments happened where there is a fridge at that exhibition that used to be in one of the prominent galleries of that downtown New York City 80s scene. And all of these artists would come in and, as a rite of passage, tag the fridge with their graffiti signatures. And so Lee came in and we looked at the fridge together, and he was able to tell me, you know, this is this artist, this is this artist. And then I was asking him where his tag is, and I thought it was one thing. He's like, no, that's not me. So yeah, that was really incredible. And he hadn't seen that fridge since 1980. So it was really amazing.
Wow, that's amazing. I bet he has a lot of stories that go with that fridge. So talking about stories, I love stories. And so I want to know how you ended up here at the museum. What has been your trajectory in your career that has landed you here since 2016?
It's been a bit of a winding path.
It usually is.
So I went to BU. I had a vague plan of being pre-med, actually. That lasted for about 2 or 3 weeks. I was in Chem 101. I dropped it. Didn't know what I was going to do. I had always loved going to museums. I grew up in New Jersey, so my parents would take me to the Met and MoMA, and I've always loved those spaces, looking at the art. So I started taking some art history courses just out of curiosity. And then I've always loved writing, and so I started taking some journalism classes as well. And then I just couldn't decide, so I ended up doing both. And at the same time, I started interning at Boston Magazine, which is how I eventually became assistant editor. And I really gravitated towards writing about arts and culture. There wasn't really anyone on staff who was already doing it. And so I just decided, you know, this is important to cover and I really like doing this. And so I'm going to do it. And so that's how I really got to know the people who work at the museums around the city, local artists. And at the same time, while I was still in school, I was in my art history classes, certainly, but also in other classes using the MFA as a resource. So I would go there, you know, just to hang out, but also to write my art history papers on certain objects. There's a mosque lamp in the Arts of Islamic Cultures Gallery that's very near and dear to my heart because I wrote like 5 pages on it. And I also use it for my journalism classes, but even though I've always loved going to museums, I never saw myself being anything but a visitor. And mostly that's because I just didn't know that there were all these jobs available in these places. And even studying art history at BU, I think the focus is primarily on curatorial work, which requires a lot of schooling. Curators need to get a PhD and choose a specialization. And I didn't really see myself going down that path. And so I wasn't really sure what I would do. But as I was writing all these stories for Boston Magazine and getting to know curators and the PR team, I was seeing that there are all these jobs available. And so the opening came up and I decided to cross over to the PR side. And I've been there for 5 years now, which is insane.
Yeah. And there's more that you do here as well that brings you outside of sort of the regular public relations. I know that I've been in a couple of meetings with you in the planning of some of the programming for Basquiat and other things. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that looks like as well?
Sure. So as we have had to pivot to having all of our events be virtual, I've been more involved in both the logistical and the tech aspects of it. If we need to live stream something to Facebook or YouTube, I'm there on the back end figuring out how to do that. But also having input on the content. So, what questions the moderator should be asking, for example, the artist that's on the panel, or what images do we need to show? And that's a little bit different from how it used to be when we were in person. So our role was primarily to document and promote these events. So our community celebrations, for example, we have a suite of 10 or 11 of them that we used to have in person. So um, for example, our Lunar New Year celebration, Juneteenth, Memorial Day open house, and our team would be on site capturing all the performances and spotlight talks and things going on and putting them out on our social media channels. So this has been interesting to kind of take a step back and actually be involved in the creation of the programs.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting year. What do you think are some of the challenges that you're facing or have faced in the last year that have just, with the way the world has been with COVID, with closing, how has that challenged you in your work here at the museum?
We've definitely had to become a lot more flexible. And, we used to work off an exhibition schedule and an event schedule. So we would always know this exhibition is opening this month and we have this event coming up. And so we kind of know what we need to promote. When COVID hit, we didn't know when the museum was going to reopen, when exhibitions, the whole schedule shifted. And on top of that, beyond the museum, there were, forces no one can control about changing guidelines about, capacities and masks. And so that has been challenging. I think just kind of adapting to new guidelines coming out every day. But at the same time, as we had to pivot, I think it's forced us to be a little more creative too. So last summer, when we were still closed, we came up with the series of artist takeovers, and that stemmed from a desire to help support local artists during the pandemic. And so we worked closely with curators in the contemporary and photography departments, and they put together a list and put us in touch with local artists in the Boston area and also some based in New England. And I worked on developing a questionnaire for them about what their life was like during COVID. What were they making, if anything? How are they adjusting? And they sent me pictures and statements that I then put together into Instagram stories. So we did 19 of these. And that was really a lifeline for me personally during the pandemic, because it gave me, it was really motivating to work with these artists and to get to know them. Actually, two of them are behind me. I have Stephen Hamilton and Sneha Shrestha, who goes by Imagine. And so I think that was really good for us to think outside of our walls, because before the pandemic, we primarily posted about works of art that people could see on site. And with this, we went beyond our walls and beyond our collection. A lot of these artists weren't represented in our collection at the time. or still. And so it was really nice to be able to give our platform over. We have more than 1.3 million followers across our social media channels. And so it was really nice to be able to give them that platform and to give them financial support as well, because we paid them an honorarium for their participation.
Yeah, that artist takeover was really impactful for me to see, first of all, the folks of color that were part of that, reaching, like you said, reaching outside our walls, which is, another way that we build trust with communities. And it's another way for us to sort of extend our invitation and welcome to the community. And it was just so well done and so phenomenal. So I personally enjoyed it. I know that in the chat, Sophia thank you, Sophia. She has put in a lot of resources, and one of them is the artist takeover that was featured on the MFAIG. There's also links to the community celebration. All of this information that is in our chat will also be part of the transcript that we share at the end of the program that will be emailed to you. I invite folks now, would be a good time for you to, if you have any questions, I encourage you to use our chat function to add those. But Olga, as we wait for somebody to, or folks to start adding their questions, going back to social media and sort of, being, thinking with our inclusion lens and thinking about community and building trust with community. It is Asian American Pacific Islander Month, as we know. And there are some special postings that are happening and on our social media pages. And so I just wanted you to share a little bit with us about what the process of selecting the posts and the objects that are shown in the posts.
Sure, thanks for asking about this. So with the recent rise in violence against Asian Americans in this country, we really wanted to do something as a museum that would highlight the contributions of this population to this country, but in a meaningful way and in a way that made sense for the museum. And so, like you said, May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we thought that was the perfect opportunity for us to pull together our resources, the wealth of knowledge that our curators have, and to highlight all of the artists that have made amazing contributions to the cultural landscape of this country. And so we brought together the curators and you, Rosa, for guidance. And there was conversation about, we wanted to post a variety of mediums. So artists working in sculpture and painting and drawing and architecture. And the other interesting piece that came up was how we don't want to assume that certain artists identify as Asian American. And so we leaned heavily on the curators, and in a lot of the cases, the curators actually reached out to the artists themselves and said, hey, we'd really love to post about you on the MFA social media channels, but are you okay with being identified this way? Or, even more specifically, how would you like to be identified? Because we never want to make assumptions.
Right.
And so, yeah, if you go to our social media channels, we've been posting every few days, highlighting artists like I Am Pei, who designed our Lindy family wing for contemporary art. He's a famous architect. Most of the time, it's posting works by the artists themselves. In some cases, there are stories where we don't have a work by that artist or a representation of that artist, but we have an object that tells their story. So there's this fabulous dress by Travis Banton that Anna May Wong wore in a movie. She was the first Chinese American movie star in Hollywood. And so that's a really great story that we wanted to be able to tell. So even though the dressmaker is not Asian American, it was a way to tell her story through that object.
Yeah. It's fantastic. And should we expect more of course, for Asian American Pacific Islander Month, we still have a few, but also sort of honoring other communities as their months or celebratory months come up. Will we be doing some more of those?
Yes, definitely. We always mark these months. But the other consideration is, we don't want to just post about these artists during these months. And so we take great care in showing a variety of artists and mediums on our channels all the time.
I think that's right. And, I think as we extend the invitation, I also see our social media pages as that invitation. We want to know what's in what is being shown and what, isn't in galleries also, that I know that are also shared in our social media pages. What are you working on right now that excites you?
Um,
Any project, anything that's, really making you excited?
I mentioned one of my favorite things is being in the galleries with curators and looking at art. And so one of the things I'm working on is a series of close looking posts at our Monet exhibition. So right now in our Lindy family wing, we have an exhibition called Monet in Boston Legacy Illuminated. And it is 25 paintings by Monet, but then also additional works by Rodin and Millet and other artists who were Monet's contemporaries. And a lot of the times we'll post the work of art itself, the full work, and we'll work with the curator or interpretation and adapt the label copy to social media. So, condensing it to 280 characters for Twitter. But in this series, we're getting a little more creative and work with the curator who went through and pointed out just fun details that are not in the labels. So things like, oh, in this painting, have you ever noticed this cat lounging in the corner? Or have you noticed that Monet signs his name on paintings in different colors and why? Or one of my favorite paintings, Flowers at Vithoi, has this mass of, you can tell it's flowers, but it's impressionist, so it's a lot of colors. It's kind of indecipherable, but the curator points out that there's little sunflowers sticking out if you look really closely. So I'm excited to do that. And then the other thing I'm excited about, as I mentioned, working with living artists. So we have another exhibition coming up called New Light Encounters and Connections, where we're putting together new acquisitions into 21 pairings with works that were acquired earlier in the museum's collection. And so, for example, there is a contemporary work by Lakila Brown that's being paired with an ancient Egyptian relief. And so it'll be interesting to see those works in conversation. And I'm really interested. We're planning on bringing some of the artists in to see their work and to get their reactions on. For a lot of them, it's their first time to have their work acquired by the museum. And so that's always a special moment. And then I am really excited to see their reactions on the objects that their work is paired with.
Amazing. So many good things coming up. It sounds like, what about, you mentioned a painting, but I told you I would ask you this. Any other favorite object that you have in the museum that, the folks here should come and see? That's on display, or maybe it isn't on display, but
I'll give you two additional ones. So I have always loved our portrait by Kehinde Wiley. It's just beautiful. It's called John First Baron Byron. It's in our Art of the Americas wing. For those of you who don't know Kehinde Wiley, he is most recently famous for doing the portrait of President Obama. So he's just a phenomenal artist and one of my favorites.
It's actually my favorite object here. As a newbie, that's it.
And then I always, with our rotating exhibitions, we'll have a new favorite object every time there's a new show on view. And so in the Basquiat exhibition, I really like, there's this massive painting made by Futura, who actually made the painting while The Clash was performing, and Futura was on stage with them and he was spray painting. And it's just really colorful and fun and big, and I encourage everyone to go see it.
Yes, I've seen it and I love it too. There's a question, does the MFA segment its social audiences? If so, does it mirror any way that the MFA segments or buckets its general audience?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by segmenting.
Christian, do you want to unmute really quickly?
Yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of when I'm dealing with social media, I often am thinking of the different audiences that are on different platforms. So I'm curious if when you're launching things, you're thinking of different audiences, and how does that relate to how the MFA thinks about its varied audiences that come and interact with the organization?
Sure, yeah. So we definitely tailor our content for each individual platform. And so, for example, recently, I think last week, we posted about our teen programs who are recruiting for the new cycle. So we have 3 teen programs. It's the Teen Arts Council, STEAM Team, and Curatorial Study Hall. And so we use the same image across channels, but in thinking about the different audiences on each channel, kind of tailored the copy. So on LinkedIn, we knew it was going to be geared towards parents. Same on Facebook. And so the copy was something like, do you know a teenager that's interested in getting involved at the museum? And then on Instagram, the teen programs actually have their own account. And so we know that's a platform that they're on. And so it was tailored a little bit to say, are you a teen, or do you know a teen that's interested in becoming involved at the museum? So we'll do that. We'll tailor some of the imagery, but for the most part, we still post the same type of content across channels.
Thank you, Christian. As we close, we have about 4 minutes. So if anybody has a burning question they want to add to the chat, this would be a good time. Any advice for folks who are thinking about entering the field, Olga?
I would say reach out and talk to people. I think I mentioned that I didn't really know that there were all these jobs available at the museum. And so I think that's why our teen programs are so great. And this series that you're doing, Rosa, even I work at the museum and I'm learning about so much of what our colleagues do. And so, yeah, I would encourage people to just reach out, look on LinkedIn. Even sometimes we get messages on the MFA Instagram saying like, I'm a college student, I'm interested in interviewing you for an informational interview. Like, is there anyone willing to talk to me? I'm always happy to do that. And I think it's really helpful to see what people's day-to-day jobs are and if that's something that would interest you.
We do have one more question that just came in. What available chances for promising new artists? Not sure I know that. Do you, Olga?
Promising new artists at the museum.
I mean, I would think that some of the sort of like the artist takeover of the Instagram page. Anything else coming up?
We do have a community arts initiative project that happens every year.
Yes.
I believe the artist for next year has already been chosen, but that's usually a call for a proposal that's put out. And this artist takes the lead on working with our community arts initiative partners, so Boys and Girls Clubs and other after-school organizations. And they guide them through close-looking activities and art-making activities throughout the year. And then at the end, they all come together and create a collaborative installation that's on view at the museum. So that's a really great one that happens every year.
Yes. It's actually last year's, this year's has just been installed in the Lindy family wing. And so if you haven't seen that, it's phenomenal. It's beautiful. And it's, it was done via Zoom. I shout out and kudos to that artist who was able to engage those students virtually and then put together such a beautiful exhibition of the work that they did throughout the year. So yes, check out Community Arts Initiative. It's a great opportunity. Thank you for sharing that, Olga. And thank you for being with us. I told you to go fast. I'm so grateful for the work that you do. I'm so grateful for spending time with you, that you've spent time with us, that you've shared a little bit about yourself and your work. And for everyone out there, I'm grateful for you for joining us today and keep coming back. If you are interested in seeing someone be interviewed, a position or an area that you've always been curious about in the museum, please email learning@mfa.org and we will get that to you. Thanks a lot, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.